Sable is a really iconic Canadian island. There are millions of Canadians who've never visited Sable, probably never will, but can see themselves amidst those dunes with the horses running and the timbers of the shipwreck rising from the sand.
It needs protection from visitors. It needs protection from industry. It needs protection from people who want to do the wrong thing there.
Hello, I'm Tom Murphy. Welcome to Land and Sea. Almost 300 kilometers out there off Halifax is Sable Island, soon to be Canada's newest national park. Many people have it on their bucket list of places to visit, but they also want it protected. The challenge is it won't be easy to find the right balance. You need permission and good weather to set foot on Sable Island. By sea or by air, it's hard to be sure of a clear window between the fog and the storms of the Northwest Atlantic. Only one plane goes there, a charter available for just over $5,000 a day. Julie Tampa and Jonathan Shepard work for Parks Canada. By 2015, they must come up with a plan to figure out just what a national park on the island could do. Most conservationists think it's a good fit.
Parks Canada can deal with tourism and tourists. It knows how to manage natural areas which are fragile, which is absolutely the case for Sable Island.
Martin Willison is an ecologist and conservationist. He speaks for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society.
And they know how to present natural systems in a way that people can understand and respect and protect. It's a long way offshore. It's just a speck of sand in the ocean, as it were. It's actually a very huge set of sand dunes.
The sand dunes give the island its name, identified on early French maps as Île des Sables, Island of Sands. The English adopted the name Sable, almost 300 kilometers off Nova Scotia on the edge of the continental shelf. It's 42 kilometers long, no souvenir shops, no wharves. The runway is the beach, and sometimes it's flooded or too soft for a landing. Not today, though. Tampa and Shepard won't be staying for long. They're based in Halifax and must make short trips to the island, weather and budget permitting. They have a lot to learn about this place. One of their teachers, Jerry Forbes, in charge of the weather station here for 30 years. He's seen big changes on the island.
Some places it's being lost, other places it's building. But the island is longer now than it was 30 years ago, so it's certainly not just wasting away.
The other teacher is Zoe Lucas, a researcher and writer. She understands why people want to visit. She was drawn here over 40 years ago. It changed her life.
I managed to come out to Sable Island for a couple of days to see the horses, and I was swept away. Really, just completely swept away by everything, the landscape, the clearness of everything, the visibility, the sky, the smells. And so I went back to Halifax, but I always wanted to come back to Sable, and so I started volunteering. I volunteered as a cook on a field project and just volunteered until I could actually work here.
It's not just the horses which make it special. The Ipswich sparrow nests and thrives here. Without Sable Island, this subspecies of savanna sparrow would not exist. Sable's also the main breeding ground for Atlantic Canada's population of grey seals, who give birth to as many as 50,000 pups a year.
Sable Island is a really unique place. Certainly there's nowhere else like it in Canada. It's got incredible natural and cultural features, from the population of wild horses, 350 species of migratory birds, 190 species of plants, all those kinds of natural features.
There is nowhere like it in Canada. A 40-kilometer island of shifting sands, pushed there by glaciers, held in place by two powerful ocean forces, the cold Labrador Current that flows from the north and the warm Gulf Stream surging from the south. A recipe for storms and fog and disaster.
My name is Dan Conlon. I'm Curator of Marine History here at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. And in our Days of Sail gallery right behind me, you'll see this beautiful but rather spooky shattered, worn figurehead, a headless figurehead. This headless figurehead comes from Sable Island. It's a beautifully carved lady, but you can see she's been sandblasted by the blowing sand on Sable. And this shattered piece of wreckage just emerged from the sands of Sable in the 1950s. Nobody knows what shipwreck it came from. It's from some of the hundreds of wrecks on Sable. And the sad fact about Sable, often ships would just disappear.
Disappear and sometimes reappear centuries later. Jerry Forbes shows Julie Tompa what appears to be a mast from a wooden sailing ship.
The guesses are that it's old, but how old? There are no clues on just what little bits here. I would be surprised though if you actually sort of excavated it and looked, on the underside. There might be some clue in the way something was fashioned to tell you where it came from.
What kind of ship? How many lives lost? No one will ever know. It's part of the mystery that continues to fire the imagination. In the days of sail, despite the dangers, explorers and merchants feel the spell of the island and dream of settlement and riches. The dreams all fail. But one hardy group of survivors remain. Their origins may come as a surprise.
There's that very romantic legend, they swam ashore from a Spanish shipwreck. You'll see that over and over again. Most historians have looked at this seriously, found there's no evidence behind that. Our most detailed account is in the 1760s. Some Boston merchants have bought a large number of horses from the Acadians who'd just been deported from Atlantic Canada. And they had all these surplus horses, so they put them out on Sable Island. And that seems to be the most reliable account of where the horses came from. The merchants from Boston who put the horses on Sable in the 1760s just seem to have left them there. They were just left free as the wind to establish their own population.
But in the early 19th century, the Sable Island horses lose their isolation. Even before Canada is a nation, the Nova Scotia government decides it must do something to prevent the mounting loss of life from shipwrecks.
It was quite a unique accomplishment for the tiny colony of Nova Scotia in 1801 to set up a very large and difficult and expensive rescue station on this island, where most of the wrecks actually didn't come from Nova Scotia. They came from ships all over the world. Setting up a establishment of rescue men, lookouts, all their families, and keeping them supplied, and looking after the large number of survivors was a real challenge for the small colony of Nova Scotia.
By the end of World War II, new technology makes the station obsolete. Sonar and radar keeps ships away from the sandbars. In 1959, the story of Sable Island takes another turn, and the fate of its horses hangs in the balance. We'll be right back. Sable Island's wild horse population has been here since the 1700s, but that almost comes to an end in 1959. The rescue station is shut down, and it's felt they can't be left on their own.
They actually posted sort of notices that they were going to sell them off, and this created a huge outcry that they'd be sold off for dog food or mistreated, and there was a wonderful protest movement led by a lot of Canadian children. And Prime Minister Diefenbaker then sort of amended the Shipping Act that sort of governs the access to Sable to say no one may interfere with the horses. And since 1960, the herd has been free from any human interference.
Zoe Lucas has studied almost 3 generations of horses now. They survive only on the native grasses, drink rainwater in shallow ponds, or dig for the fresh water just below the surface. They don't count on humans for food, nor are they afraid.
Because they're protected, because they're not interfered with by people, they're not too wary. So you can sit, in an area where there are horses, and they'll ignore you and just go about their horsey lives. And that's the very best thing that you can expect from viewing wildlife, is that they don't notice you. They don't run away from you, and they just let you view, let you share and understand a bit about what they're doing and how they live.
Lucas patrols Sable's beaches day after day. The oil and gas industry pays her to keep a watch out for spills and oiled birds. She collects animal bones and tissues, sending samples to the Nova Scotia Museum. Her beach surveys reveal an endless variety of trash. After 40 years, she has an impressive yet discouraging collection of human garbage, tossed to shore by storms, dropped to earth by the wind.
It used to be that marine pollution, you'd see a lot of glass wine bottles and condiments, but everything was in glass, and nowadays everything's in plastic.
She thinks visitors to Sable Island National Park can learn a lot from this place, a lesson for Tampa and Shepherd.
So what happens with this stuff is that I have to separate it. So for instance, there's fragments of balloons. Now you can get sort of shreds of balloons, and then the neck of the balloon with the ring. Well, the way to actually count the number of balloons is to count them by this, because you can't count a shred, because that might be or might not be the part of another balloon. So this is what I count, and this is just an example of a collection of.
Wow. So over how much time would this have been collected?
This would be 6 years, roughly. Wow. It's not a collection of everything that came ashore. I just kept them because I wanted to use them to show school children when I do a talk.
Powerful teaching tool.
So this is balloons. Wow. So now, how many do you think are in here?
Too many.
What's your guess?
I'm gonna guess 1,200.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, what's yours?
15,000.
He wins. Like big time. It's 12,048 balloons in here. So yeah.
Wow.
He's good on garbage. Good on garbage.
Lucas uses her bucket of helium balloon remnants to teach mainland students.
With the balloons in particular, they get quite involved, quite engaged, because it's a marine pollution item that they can relate to.
Absolutely.
That they can make choice. I mean, in their own personal lives, it's something that they can absolutely make choices about. To say, I do or I don't want balloons at my party, or I'm not going to buy a balloon. And they understand it. They understand what they want to do about it. And so this is it's a really good introduction for children to have something that they can take charge of and actually make a change.
But Sable's no place for school field trips. So now it's up to Parks Canada to figure out a combination of on-site experiences and virtual visits, something to satisfy people's thirst for exposure to the island and the need to keep it safe. We'll be right back. Sable Island is isolated and windswept, a good place for a weather station. Twice a day, hydrogen-filled balloons soar high into the outer atmosphere. Their sensors collect data about pollution, ozone, and radiation. This is just one of the many measurements taken here. In charge of it all is Jerry Forbes. On an island where everything from food to fuel must be shipped in, his job is key.
I guess my primary role is managing the life support, the infrastructure, power, water, sewage, clean water, things like that. Supervising the staff that are doing the meteorological programs, some maintenance and other work on those components, and then of course supporting aircraft and ships and finding runways and handling visitors and things like that. So there's a very broad list of duties.
The weather station will stay. Parks Canada will need someone like Jerry to keep the systems running. But in recent years, as concern over the island's ecology increased, he says other expertise is needed.
Well, there's always been a question about managing Sable Island. Coast Guard managed it under the Canada Shipping Act, but the Canada Shipping Act doesn't really deal with ecosystem protection. So where people have for many years talked about the fragility of the ecosystem, who was going to manage that was always difficult. So the Meteorological Service, as the only resident government presence, found itself frequently in that role, but it's also outside our area of expertise as well. So we did what we could, but now to have Parks and all their experts involved is just great.
But what will the national park provide? A campground? An eco-lodge? Its shifting sands make that a non-starter.
The difficulty of maintaining any kind of an elaborate structure on essentially a sandbar are daunting. There's various things that will restrict the number of people that can be here at any one time. You know, the water resources are limited, for instance. Access to the island is always going to be restricted by the cost of getting here. It's very expensive to get here and to operate on the island because it's so far offshore. But the island could certainly, the island itself could accommodate more visitors.
Parks Canada's Julie Tampa says no decisions have been made. They are considering options used at other remote national parks with fragile ecosystems.
Pack in, pack out, leave no trace kind of visitation, that's the norm in many of our places, particularly in more remote locations. People can stay at a base camp, going into remote areas of the park with a guide. There's all kinds of options, and Parks Canada certainly has a breadth of experience from other locations that can be brought to bear when thinking about what's possible for Sable Island. But again, all to be determined over the coming years.
On a clear day, visitors to the park will notice a looming industrial neighbor about 10 kilometers offshore. There's been oil and gas activity here for more than 40 years. There are 2 natural gas pipelines to the mainland and more rigs coming.
Certainly it's a concern, as it would be in any national park where there's industrial development in the vicinity.
As recently as 1967, there was exploration drilling right on the island. But that can't happen now. The companies have given up surface rights. They also agreed there'd be no rigs closer than 1 nautical mile. That deal helped make the national park possible.
The companies had existing significant discovery licenses to those reserves, and in order for that legislated ban on drilling to be put into effect, they had to voluntarily amend their licenses, and they were more than willing to do so.
So they gave up certain rights that they had already acquired.
That's right, they gave up certain rights, exactly, so that the national park could be established.
So no surface drilling on the island, but the national park agreement still allows for horizontal drilling to reach underneath the island from offshore. Some critics worry that Canada's hunger for natural resources leave places like Sable Island too vulnerable. Ecologist Martin Willison says the industry is on notice.
And working with the industry is something that will have to be done. And it will have to be done in a way which results in the right outcome. And the right outcome is one which retains the ecological integrity of the island. We can't compromise that.
What about the fear of a spill? Right now, the only drilling is for natural gas. Parks Canada's Tampa says it's a safe industry.
It's very tightly regulated, and the Offshore Petroleum Board has a strong environmental record in working with the industry and in regulating that. They have emergency spill response plans, and certainly the designation of Sable as a national park is an added consideration in those response plans.
Zoe Lucas says so far the industry's had no impact. She's glad that Parks Canada will join her now at keeping an eye on its big neighbor offshore. And she'll be a key advisor to Parks Canada as they devise a way to keep the island safe. In the meantime, she will continue to study the cycles of life and death on Sable, from its horses to its tiniest of invertebrates. It's time to prep the runway for departure. If all goes as planned, there'll be more of this activity on Sable Island. Jerry Forbes thinks Parks Canada is on the right track.
They're really looking at ways to make this a really good park and provide people who come here with the best thing that they can get.
Over the next 4 years, new legislation must be enacted, transferring jurisdiction of Sable to Parks Canada. Those who care about the island and its environment hope the agency gets it right. A lot is riding on its success.
It is a priority, so while you want to have a positive experience for visitors and you want to make the park accessible to visitors, available to Canadians, the priority will be to make sure that Sable Island is not harmed.